Hello, Farming Secrets community, and welcome to another Let's Talk Soil session. Today, I'm joined by Christo. How are you doing today?
Very good, thanks. And thanks for inviting me on to your session.
Excellent. Now, you've been around our Farming Secrets community for a while, and you share lots of articles and journals and papers that support everyone's love for soil and especially the carbon that's in atmospheric and soil. So share with us a little bit about who you are and what you've been working on over the last few projects.
Okay. Well, I sort of cut my teeth on organic farming in 1971 in Sydney. We were the first to supply organic food into the Sydney market at market price. I had my nose turned to the ground weeding a lot, so soil became almost meditative to me in actually being totally immersed in it when you've got so many hours with your nose pointed and weeding carrots in particular. Since then, I went on to medicine, and then subsequent to that, I went into cancer research because unfortunately 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women are developing cancer, and part of that's due to agricultural toxicants. Then I started in 2004, went to the first carbon farming conference and became acutely aware of the capacity for soil to be a sink. Soils have become suffocated. They're on life support with IV intravenous drips of chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, all of which degrades the soil, decreases nutrient density, decreases health of the plant, animals, and people, and ultimately the planet itself. My quest is really, in regard to soil, is make the problem the solution. Simply put, there's too much of a good thing in the wrong place. CO2 in the atmosphere is obviously trapping heat, but if we sequester that carbon and sink it in the ground by different mechanisms, which I can elaborate later, we actually use it as a resource. Similarly to nitrogen, why put nitrogen fertilizer on the ground when 78% of it in the atmosphere is free? Similarly with methane, we can use methanotropes in our soil inoculants to actually draw down and fix the methane in the ground. We don't need to use these chemical-based fertilizers. Lastly, one of the blind spots we have is we're focusing too much on carbon. Got no issue with that. Second blind spot is we've got tunnel vision with regard to renewable energies. I've got no problem with going to renewable energies. However, if we switch tomorrow with a magic wand and said no more carbon emissions, we still have the legacy of that increased carbon for hundreds of years to come. Furthermore, 93% of the heat that's been trapped by greenhouse gases has gone into the oceans. Now that will equilibrate, so that trapped heat or transferred heat in the oceans will come back to the atmosphere for hundreds of years to come. Obviously, we're getting tipping points like the melting of the permafrost and even release of methane from the ocean floor. So we're really at a crisis point. But if you take the concept that we make the problem the solution, or too much of a good thing in the wrong place, we can use specific microbes to fix carbon dioxide into the soil, to fix nitrogen directly into the soil, and to fix methane directly into the soil. When we use certain microbes, we use a particular inoculant which has got over 500 identified species. We encourage, or that some of those microbes actually produce humus. Humus is stable carbon. Humus builds a structure which is ideal for plant growth. Humus carries a lot of water with it. And ultimately, our goal is to make the soil like a carbon sponge. Every 1% increase in soil carbon increases the water holding capacity of the soil by 144,000 litres. Mm-hmm. So we can conceptualize it this way. I'd like to bring a paradigm which is almost going to flip things on its head. The first thing is plants and microbes build soil. Fertilizers destroy soil and the atmosphere and water quality. I'm going to say it again. Plants and microbes build soil. Fertilizers destroy soil structure, emit CO2, nitrous oxide, pollute the water, and ultimately create a very one-sided nutrition in the plant with NPK only. That results in weakened plants. Those weakened plants, insects have a compound eye, and they actually see these plants emitting a different frequency. And the pest's job is to weed them out before they actually reproduce. So we're shooting the messenger, and we're not getting the message that we can't use NPK for so many reasons. Lastly, on that point, nitrogen fertilizer, for every 1 kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer, we consume 12 kilograms of soil carbon, that vital soil carbon. Extending that idea further, it's really important to think holistically. The focus only on carbon is really not what nature's doing. Carbon is kind of pivotal, but we need to see the relationship of how carbon got into the soil first place through the solar cycle, the day-night cycle. During the day, there's photosynthesis. At night, the a percentage of the excess photosynthates or sugars go into the soil, up to 40%, which feeds the microbes. The microbes then symbiotically feed the plant. Second cycle is the carbon cycle. Third interconnected cycle is the water cycle. And we can sum it up by saying water follows carbon as sure as night follows day. And the fifth one is the nutrient cycle, where microbes, again, cycle nutrients in a slow release manner in an individualized feeding regime, and not just splashing in excess water-soluble fertilizers, which the plant becomes dumbed down. It has no choice. It has to suck it up, and only 10% or 30% at best of those nitrogen fertilizers goes to the plant, which means 70 to 90% goes as nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more warming capacity than carbon dioxide, or it goes as nitrates in the water, which cause cancer, eutrophication, dead zones, mass fish kills, and so on. So we're doing it all wrong. And yet 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. And in the North American Indians, they talk of the three sisters. One is corn, which is a nitrogen heavy feeder. The other is beans, which fixes nitrogen. And the third is squash, which covers the soil and protects it like an umbrella, so you maintain the soil moisture. Those three sisters work together in community, and we need to get away, obviously, from monoculture. We need to keep the ground covered all of the time, all of the ground covered all of the time, to stop wind erosion, soil erosion, maintain water, keep the nutrients with deep root, allowing roots to be there all the time, so that when they break down, they're adding soil carbon at depth. So really, this thing, the mantra of making the problem the solution, primarily through microbes and plants. The other thing that I'd like to turn things on its head, so to speak, is that we talk about building soil. The focus is on soil, but as I said before, plants build soil. But what is not commonly known, and this is it takes a while to sink in, but when you really get this shift in paradigm, if you have a crop, a ton of crop, and you dehydrate it because 70% of the plant's water, the actual amount of material, substance that's in that dehydrated crop, 95% came from the atmosphere. 95%. Now, we talk about pedogenesis, or, weathering of rock and forming, parent material for soil. That's true. But 95% came from plant. Now, that might sound very airy-fairy, but I'll substantiate it by saying the following. Patterson's curse. Patterson's curse grows not only in drought, but where there's copper deficiency in the soil. Guess what Patterson curse concentrates? What element it concentrates?
Copper.
You got it. You got it. So not that I'm advocating this, but one solution to Patterson's curse is actually putting copper sulfate in the soil. I'm not saying to do that, but once you've built the copper in the soil, the job of the Patterson's curse is done. Each weed has a function, either breaking up compacted soil or actually drawing down these trace elements from the atmosphere. To give another example, rose bushes, if you plant a rose bush and you analyze the soil initially, there'll be virtually no titanium there. But rose bush has the capacity to draw down these very, very small amounts of trace elements, in this case, titanium. And over time, when the petals die, the leaves die, etc., you'll get ever increasing amounts of titanium. All of the trace elements are in the atmosphere. Where do they come from? Well, if you look at the ocean, all the trace elements and ultra trace elements and macro elements are in the ocean. When you get evaporation, it's not just pure water, it's got salt with all these accompanying elements. So that's then distributed via, the great cycles of winds and movement of winds, and those trace elements then become present. Each plant has a capacity to draw down and collect. So again, when you're building soil, you want, for instance, a cover crop, at least 30 different species, because each of them will bring down different elements from the atmosphere when it's dyed or slashed or roller crimped or whatever you do with it. You wouldn't want to turn it in because you're going to oxidize the soil. Those nutrients become available once the microbes digest the plant, and then they store it in their body, and when they die, they release them, or they are very good at sharing those nutrients around. So really, we need to farm the air. We need to plant diverse crop species for green crops or cover crops. We need to cover the ground, all of the time. And we need to understand that we can use particular families of microbes, and which includes fungi, which have the capacity to draw these excess greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and store them in a very beneficial way in the soil. I'd like to get back to water vapor. Unless we look at the major component of 95% of the greenhouse gas effect is accounted for by water vapor, unless we look at that seriously, we're going to miss the boat. We're really going to miss the boat. And well, more than that, we're just heading for that iceberg of the Titanic, and all we're doing is shifting the deck chairs around. But to be very positive, for instance, the work of Professor Peter McGee at Sydney University, who I had occasion to work with for a short period, he was working on a revegetation project for rehabilitating mining sites, and he, with others, found a melanizing, that's melanin, carbon, what makes us skin go brown in the sun, melanizing endophytic, meaning it interdigitates with the roots of plants, fungi. When you coat a seed before you sow it with the melanizing endophytic fungi, similar to the way you inoculate rhizobia of legumes or seeds with nitrogen-fixing bacteria, you're actually drawing down carbon directly. And if you compared melanizing endophytic fungi with other fungi, you're getting a 19% increase in soil carbon just by doing that. So you inoculate the seed with the MEFs, the melanizing fungi. So that's one strategy alone has a significant difference. In my work, which I'm hoping to get some funding for, I've calculated very roughly that with using a number of strategies, and I'll list them if time permits, which can be accumulative. Now, I'm making sort of prediction, which obviously needs to be tested and measured precisely, but it's my initial calculations, perhaps optimistically, suggest that if we implemented the following strategies, which I'll enumerate, on only 5% of the arable land on the planet, we would draw down 100% of the CO2 emissions.
That's quite interesting that we only need a small amount of land to fix a very large problem, because it's done smarter, not harder.
but it takes a bit to change the paradigm. So if I can just go through them. Firstly, we talked about plants. So we need to work with the fast growing plants. Obviously the fastest growing plant on the planet is kelp, and that's dying due to increased temperatures and acidification. So we're getting deforestation of these giant kelp forests, which grow 30 centimeters a day. But on land, hemp is very fast growing. And in fact, you can grow 2 crops per year, which means you can draw down 80 tons of CO2 per year. So the calculation is if you used hemp in a rotation as a rotational crop on only 10% of the arable land, that would offset 64% of CO2 emissions. Now, hemp can be used for 5,000 products or up to 25,000 products, from toilet paper to CBD oil, etc., to fireproof hemp buildings. So we obviously need to work with these fast-growing plants. The other option is one which is not very well known, called canaf, which is Hibiscus cannabis. It looks like cannabis, but it's got 7 leaves, not 5. It's very fast growing. It can grow up to 3 meters tall. It's also can be cropped twice a year. Similar to hemp, every part of the plant can be used. It's got a very deep taproot and auxiliary roots, so it breaks up compacted soil. It detoxifies soil similar to hemp. It doesn't need fertilizers, herbicides, or pesticides. It is moderately salt tolerant, and it tolerates either semi-arid conditions to flooded plains. So in terms of robustness, and it doesn't invite the controversy that hemp does, even though it's not related to marijuana. Well, it's related, but not the same as marijuana, which has obviously been demonized. So canaf also, there are car companies now using canaf outer fiber to make car panels, major car companies. You can generate hydrogen. My company, we've developed isolated 2 microbes which generate hydrogen from the sugar components. The residual fiber can then be used for the central core fiber for building fireproof homes, which require no heating or cooling virtually. The outer fiber can be used for wind turbine blades, airplane bodies, boat hulls, etc. So that strategy alone is significant, 10% of the land. Second strategy is using basalt dust at the rate of 10 tons per hectare, will last for 5 years. And when it reacts with water, the magnesium silicate and calcium silicate gets converted to magnesium carbonate and calcium carbonate, which is obviously drawing down CO2, and it's a significant amount of CO2. And then you get all the benefit of the trace elements, including residual silica, which is very helpful for plants. So that's 2 strategies. Third strategy is in biodynamics, if the audience is familiar with it. And if you're not, I suggest you do look at it. We call it the BD 500, the one that you put the cow manure in the horn and bury it in the winter months. Sounds like alchemy, and it is. But the reality is, a colleague of mine in Greece for 5 years, an agronomist, used what we call Biodynamic 500 and Biodynamic 501, which is a silica spray, which increases photosynthesis, which increases exudates, which feeds the microbes. That alone will increase the soil carbon content by 0.5% on average per hectare per year. That's a significant amount. Doesn't sound like much. To put that in context, according to Ratan Lal, who's a professor of soil science at Purdue and also an advisor to the IPCC, said that if we get the soil increased by 2% per hectare per annum, that would also offset all of our carbon emissions, but that has to be on all of the land. So if we've got 0.5%, that's a good thing. So we mentioned the melanizing endophytic fungi, we mentioned the fast growing plants which sequester carbon as rotation crops and are very profitable, much more than corn or wherever else. We mentioned the silica. We need to obviously keep the ground covered all the time. So we need to have a diverse plant species. We can do intercropping, multi-story cropping, agroforestry, and particularly mixed farming. Although cows have very bad press, the reality is if you do carbon accounting, on balance, herbivores actually decrease CO2 in the atmosphere because basically they're shredders, they add a lot of microbes, they add their saliva, they actually turn over the carbon cycle very quickly, and there's a lot of nutrients provided with the manure and the urine. So we need to, in fact, if you look at probably the most productive farming system in terms of CO2 sequestration, a agroforestry with mixed farming, in other words, cropping and grazing, will give you the highest sequestration rate. So a different management system. There are other strategies, but it gets a little bit detailed, but I don't want to overload people. But that's really, if you add up those processes of melanizing fungi, basalt dust, fast-growing plants, cover crops, mixed farming, you've got a really, and the biodynamics, of course, the 500, 501, you've really probably exceeded the current CO2 emissions. Getting back to water, we need to see nature as an integrated whole, an interconnected whole. If we only focus on carbon, we're kind of missing the whole story. It's like a piece of string that's attached to everything. And if you pull that string, everything's going to come along with it. So it's not just carbon that you're stringing along with your plants and your microbes. It's all the attendant things that go with it. It's kind of a good proxy for looking at all the co-benefits of putting more soil, carbon in the soil, putting more water in the soil, putting more nutrients in the soil, etc. But if we only fixate on carbon, that really is missing a lot of the big picture. So getting back to water, that's the point of agency. If we build soil where if you have 100 drops of rain and you've got a soil that's turned into a sponge with a low bulk density, meaning almost 50% air and 50% solid, that means that water, when it rains, that those drops fall, it will go and percolate through the soil horizon and remain there. And particularly if you've got either cover crop, mulch, compost, or green manure crops, then that also holds that water because it acts like an umbrella shading that moisture that's been collected. And furthermore, we stop this insidious loss of topsoil, which for every ton of wheat we grow, we lose about 10 tons of topsoil if we, use tractors and so on. So that kind of is really it in a nutshell. But if there's any questions, please ask me.
Sure. Well, you've covered a lot of ground on that. And I think one of the things that I really would like to understand from your point of view, and also just to link all the other conversations that we've had with experts on these sessions as well, is what does soil actually mean to you at a personal level? Because you opened up saying that you had your head in the ground, looking at soil, pulling carrots out and weeding, and that started this love for soil or curiosity. With all your years of experience now, and obviously from what you've shared, a lot of deep knowledge, what does soil mean to you personally?
Yeah, well, soil is multifaceted, really. It's not just the elements, it's not just the microbe. When I see a soil that's living, I think of life. Thin veneer of topsoil, which is really sustaining most of terrestrial life. And I work with biodynamics and have for many years. And my inspiration I draw from is Rudolf Steiner, who was really the first, the father of organics and that whole movement, and stated quite clearly that if we go down the chemical route, which was happening at that time, he said that would be disastrous for mankind. He predicted that a long time ago. What is interesting, one of the images that I sort of is, indelible in my psyche, if you like, is he said, when you walk on the surface of the earth, one can get the imagination that you're actually walking on the diaphragm of the earth. Gaia is a living organism, and it's living and breathing. And we talk about the Amazon as the lungs of the earth. In actual fact, we need to understand that this massive diaphragm, where this transaction of this movement of the CO2 and sequestration of carbon and the production of oxygen, the exchange of many gases, is really a living realm. And we're basically using like the surgeon's knife, we're incising this diaphragm, right? When we use rotary hose, etc., we're dumbing down the soil, because we now know that through the fungal filaments, there's a communication network, just like a neuronal network, and we're dumbing down the soil. We're cutting the very communication system, the supply of nutrients, etc. We need to understand that we cannot use plowing, we cannot expose the bare soil, we cannot do a lobotomy on the soil by using tractors. We need to get away from that paradigm as quickly as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. So in your years of experience and so forth, how did we get it so wrong? Where did it go so wrong? Like I don't want you to point fingers or anything, but did humans just get in the way and feel like we couldn't control nature, or is it an ego thing? Was it bad research?
Look, I've been working with a professor of microbiology in China for 7 years, and we've shown through many field studies, both large field trials and hothouse trials, that we can increase the production by 38%. We can decrease the water needs by 50%. We virtually don't get any pests. We don't get any diseases. We get tastier food. We get longer, it's got a longer shelf life, etc. And what happens is the farmers, it's like someone's whispering in their ears, oh, you can make more, you can produce more if you use our chemicals. And all they think about is yield. Well, we can actually satisfy that, and we can improve flavor and nutrient density, but they're sucked into a paradigm where it's called the moron principle. The more you put on, the more you're supposed to get. But what is clear to the Chinese government is that the soils have been degraded like they have all over the world with these chemicals, because basically you're killing the life of the soil, and the metabolism of the soil is basically the microbial communities. And the pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, everything else aside, and fertilizers is killing the diversity and number of what really turns over the soil and is the metabolism of the soil and imbues life in the soil. So it's very hard to shift that paradigm. A lot of the research is coming out from producers of chemicals. It's very difficult to get funding for organic research, extremely difficult. Whatever research there is, it's usually small studies, and it's discounted because it doesn't have the numbers, etc., and so on. So the information's not getting through. I think the driver for change is twofold on two fronts. The primary front is the consumer. The consumer is becoming more aware. For instance, with the controversy with Roundup, people are starting to doubt it. There are 39 conditions related to Roundup exposure, not just non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So the consumer awareness is vital for change. The second thing which is happening is that you're getting diminishing returns. You can put more fertilizer on, but the costs keep going up. The yields either plateau or decreasing. And the costs of trying to repair a broken system by putting more chemicals, throwing more chemicals at it, is problematic. It was best expressed by an extraordinary PhD biochemist who was a biodynamic farmer. And he said, when you put out the fertilizer bag, you've got to go back in the shed and get out the pesticide can. So we're doing it all wrong. It's going to take a lot of shifts, but there's an opportunity with climate change, because there's more and more awareness now of the capacity of soil to be a carbon sink. And just on that point, extending my idea of the walking on the soil as a diaphragm. There are three lungs. There's the soil lung, which has got the greatest capacity to inspire CO2 via plants and microbes. The second major lung is the marine lung, where we have the phytoplankton and kelp forests, which can draw in CO2, but unfortunately when they die, they release that CO2 back in the atmosphere. And the third lung is the forests and the plants. It's in that order. Unless we prioritize according to that order, we're asphyxiating the planet, and we're heating up the planet. So poor old guys going through menopausal flushes. So we need to make her young again. And what makes her young again is giving her the right green garment to clothe her, giving her all the beautiful soil microbiome that nourishes her and supplies those cycles we talked of, and fundamentally really taking serious the importance of the water cycle and drawing down that water vapor. Because the Keeling curve is true to an extent, but Keeling was asked by Carter, he said, what's the story with this, fossil fuel emissions, etc.? And he said, look, we can't model water vapor. It's so vast, so ephemeral, shifting every millisecond, we can't model it. So they did this major error where they abstracted it out. Certainly, as you increase anthropogenic gases, you trap more heat. But the analogy I use, if you've got a gas stove and you've got a pot with a lid on it, and that's the canopy which is holding in the heat, when you turn up the gas, yes, in other words, anthropogenic gases warming the atmosphere, yes. But what it produces is more water vapor, because 70% of the surface of the planet is oceans, water bodies. So we're releasing more CO2, and it's got an amplifying effect 5-fold compared to CO2. Unless we get that positive forcing of climate change, and unless we address that through planting more plants, using plants as air conditioners, but fundamentally building the soil carbon sponge through plants and microbes, we're not really addressing the problem.
So on that note of addressing the problem, how do we get the masses to understand this? Is it about just talking more about it? Is there research being put in place? How do we get that tipping point and that shift to happen faster?
Well, interestingly, I won't be rude, but we need to, what influences change in people's decision in buying is taste. I'll give you a simple example, and I'll follow up with another example. I went shopping with my son, and we're going to buy some broccoli, and I was going to the organic broccoli, and my son said, "Dad, this broccoli is cheaper. Why did you get that one?" I said, "No, we're going to buy the organic one." Anyhow, we came home, we cooked it. I knew it was organic because there's a green caterpillar on it. And he said, "Wow, this tastes really good." I said, "Yes." So the convincer is taste. The second thing is you may know of a technology developed by the Israeli called SCIO, which is using near infrared camera, which you can put up against some food, and it'll give you readouts. You get an app which then connects to the computer in Israel, and it tells you what the nutrient profile is, what poisons are in it, etc. So that's something that's very direct to help people's buying decision. My hope for the future is that you get a barcode, you scan it, it tells you, this guy comes up, Farmer Brown says, "Hey, my cows are really happy and they're organic and blah, blah, blah," or, "I grow these tomatoes without poisons, etc." But it's really, interestingly, partly driven by science, but I think the major paradigm shift will come from consumers, and farmers are hitting the wall. When all of the numerous farmers interviewed for my book, Grounds for Hope, which is going through a rewrite for going back to the editor, this common story is they have an epiphany when they basically, like Colin Sires, for instance, he had fire, he had drought, he had no money, and he had all this, natural pasture, and he just sowed directly into it.
Yeah,
And
I was speaking the same thing to someone the other day. I referred to it as being anti-fragile, which is basically like there's nothing else more to lose. Like you're at rock bottom.
yeah,
You know, you got your back against the wall. You think, I'll just try something that I've never tried before because what have I got to lose? And
yeah,
you're quite right with that.
yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, you know, superphosphate's gone up 200% because it's related to oil. You know, we can't do that. What we need is phosphorus mobilizing bacteria. So we add in our inoculants all of the bacteria which mobilize the nutrients needs. And interestingly, without adding any phosphorus, for instance, in biodynamic soil profiles, the phosphorus increases. Of course, as you're really depleted in phosphorus, you can use rock phosphate, put it through a compost cycle so the microbes break it down and make it plant available. But we need it urgently. It has to have happened yesterday. Unfortunately, there's the status quo and the inertia is very strong. But more and more you hear about regenerative farmers, the regenerative farmers movement, what you guys are doing, and you need to be applauded for that. And all props to you. But it's the consumer, and the convincer is the tongue.
Yeah, the taste.
I'll just finish on this because it probably exceeded time. I've started this thing called, and there is an ebook available, which I can send you some information later, but I call it the 30-day climate change challenge. In my life, I've sort of wandered across different fields, one of which is cancer research. And one of the most profound research I've ever seen was simply this. Mice were in 2 cages. They were hairless mice. They were exposed to UV radiation, which of course will cause skin cancer. The only difference is that one group could only eat within a 6-hour period. The other group could eat the same food whenever they liked. I've never seen such a profound difference. The poor mice that could eat whenever they liked had huge craters like mountains on their back. The other ones had little scab. So in other words, on average, organic food has 30% more nutrients without the nasties, perhaps costs on average 20% more. If you only eat 2 meals a day within a 6-hour period of nutrient-dense food, you're already cost saving. If you have some fermented food with that as well, you're absorbing virtually 100% of the nutrients, plus you're getting the microbes. So the 3 components are eat within a 6-hour period, have some fermented food, it could be yogurt or sauerkraut, and make sure it's organic. And I've also got another ebook called Going 100% Organic on less than $10 a day. If people want to make a contribution of $25, that will go towards the documentary I'm making called The Universe Beneath Our Feet. So they get 2 free books as gifts, and that will propel people to understand 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women are getting cancer. Eating organic food within a 6-hour period with some fermented food will make a difference.
So where can I get the book from? Do you have a website?
Okay, well, I'll send you the info,
and
then they get the 2 ebooks for free or as gifts, as an enticement to. It's $25, which will be a pre-sale of tickets to the Universe Beneath Our Feet, which is a mini documentary series. Yeah.
Well, kudos to you for all the work that you're doing and what you continuously share, because I know you're very giving with your information. You send us emails and keep us on our toes with what's happening in this space as well. So we will have to wrap up really quickly, and we will share the links around this video to how they can get the ebooks and spend more time with you, because your information is definitely very detailed. And the way that you articulate it, I sit here going, it seems very simple, yet it's a big task ahead. And I'm glad that we've got advocates like yourself and others who are charging for that vision of the future.
Yeah, can I just say 2 things?
Absolutely.
The solution to climate change lies beneath our feet, and it depends on what we choose to eat. Taste the difference, feel the difference, and make a difference.
Love it. I think that's a great thing to finish on. everyone who's been listening, I think you just make it so simple. The taste, the solution beneath our feet. There's some really good keywords if you have to rewind and re-listen to that statement, because I think it's super powerful and it just articulates so easily what we need to do. And I think thank you very much for sharing all your wisdom and your knowledge today, Christo.
Thanks for inviting me, and all the best to your work.
Awesome. Farming Secrets community, until next time, make sure that you get your hands dirty and start digging deeper into your soils.
Go for it. Okay.